For 12 years, Tom Greeley lived quiet, sold flour, and kept his name buried, until a stranger walked into his store, smiled, and called him by the name he killed to forget. Dry Hollow was a town where secrets slept soundly, tucked away like coins in a dusty purse. For 12 years, Tom Greeley had been its keeper, running the general store with a gentle hand and a quiet smile. The store was the heart of Dry Hollow, smelling of cinnamon and leather where folks gathered for gossip and supplies. Tom knew everyone by name, remembered their favorite candies, and always had a kind word. He kept the shelves stocked, the floors swept, and the windows sparkling clean. He was a pillar of the community, respected and liked by all. Old Mrs. Higgins always said Tom was a blessing. Little Timmy, who loved licorice, thought he was the nicest man in the world. Even grumpy Mr. Abernathy, who never smiled, seemed a little brighter when Tom handed him his newspaper. But behind the friendly eyes and the easygoing manner, Tom carried a secret that weighed heavy on his soul. He wasn't really Tom Greeley. He was Samuel Grady, a man who had seen too much, done too much, and carried the weight of a war on his back. He'd come to Dry Hollow seeking peace, hoping to bury the past and build a new life. And for 12 years, he'd almost managed it. Almost. Sometimes, late at night, after he'd locked up the store and the crickets were chirping their lonely songs, Tom would sit on the porch, staring out at the dark. He'd see flashes. Not real flashes, but memories. The acrid smell of smoke, the earth shaking, the faces of men he'd fought beside, and the faces of men he didn't like to think about those faces. One particular night, a storm was brewing. The wind howled like a wounded animal and lightning split the sky. Tom gripped the wooden railing, his knuckles white. A vivid image flashed through his mind, a muddy trench, the screams of men, and the cold, hard steel of his rifle. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push the memories away, but they clung to him like shadows. He noticed a small scar, barely visible, on his left hand. It was a souvenir from that life, a life he desperately wanted to forget. A life where he was Samuel Grady, a soldier, a survivor, and maybe, just maybe, something worse. He took a shaky breath and looked up at the sky. The storm seemed to be mirroring the turmoil inside him. He knew, deep down, that the past wasn't really buried. It was just waiting for the right moment to claw its way back into the light. And tonight, with the storm raging around him, it felt closer than ever. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if the storm had never happened, but the unease lingered in Tom's gut. He tried to shake it off, busying himself with opening the store, arranging the apples in neat rows, and sweeping the porch. Around midday, a stranger rode into town. He was tall and lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. A long, jagged scar ran down his left cheek, twisting his mouth into a permanent sneer. He wore a dusty black coat, even though the sun was shining and his eyes were like chips of ice. He dismounted in front of the general store, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. He tied his horse to the hitching post and stood for a moment, surveying the town with a cold, calculating gaze. Then he walked slowly toward the store, his spurs jingling with each step. Tom watched him approach, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this man was trouble. This man was his past come calling. He tried to appear calm, forcing a smile as the stranger stepped inside, the bell above the door announcing his arrival with a sharp, unwelcome clang. The stranger's eyes locked onto Tom's, and a cruel smile spread across his scarred face. This was Silas. Silas leaned against the counter, his gaze never leaving Tom's face. "Nice little store you got here, Greeley," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Real peaceful. He let the word hang in the air, dripping with sarcasm. Tom swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. "Can I help you find something?" he asked, his voice sounding a little too high-pitched. Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, I think I've already found what I'm looking for." He pushed himself off the counter and took a step closer to Tom. "Tell me, Greeley," he said, his eyes narrowed, "do you ever get tired of pretending?" A bead of sweat trickled down Tom's forehead. "Pretending? I don't know what you mean." Silas's smile widened, revealing a flash of yellowed teeth. "Don't play coy with me, Grady. We both know who you really are." He paused for effect, letting the name hang in the air. Samuel Grady, that name ring a bell. The air in the store seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. Tom's carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. He looked around, noticing Mrs. Higgins browsing the canned goods and little Timmy staring wide-eyed from behind his mother's skirt. They were listening. "I think you have me mistaken for someone else," Tom said, his voice barely a whisper. Silas just shook his head. "No mistake, Grady. The war may be over, but some debts never get paid." That night Tom couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, the words Samuel Grady echoing in his mind like a death knell. He got out of bed and walked to the window, staring out at the moonlit town. Was it time to run again, to pack up his meager belongings and disappear into the night, leaving behind everything he had built? The thought was tempting, a siren's call promising safety, but at what cost? He had friends here, people who depended on him. He had a life, a good life, even if it was built on a lie. But what if Silas was right? What if some debts never got paid? What if his past was too dark, too dangerous to be kept hidden any longer? Could he risk exposing Dry Hollow to the violence that had haunted him for so long? He thought of Mrs. Higgins with her kind smile and her endless supply of gossip. He thought of little Timmy with his love of licorice and his innocent eyes. He thought of all the people who had welcomed him into their lives, who had trusted him, who had given him a second chance. Could he betray that trust? He closed his eyes, his head in his hands. He was trapped between two worlds, between the man he was and the man he used to be, and he didn't know which one would win. He knew he would protect the town at all costs, but how? The next day, Tom noticed subtle shifts in the town's atmosphere. People who usually greeted him with a smile now offered a hesitant nod, their eyes lingering on him a moment too long. He saw Mrs. Higgins whispering to Mr. Abernathy, their gazes darting in his direction. Even little Timmy seemed wary, clinging tightly to his mother's hand as they walked past the store. Silas was always there, a shadow lurking in the background. He'd sit on the porch of the saloon, whittling a piece of wood, his eyes fixed on the general store. Or he'd stand across the street, leaning against a building, his presence a constant reminder of the danger Tom faced. Tom tried to act normal, to go about his business as usual, but it was hard. Every question felt like an accusation, every glance like a judgment. He saw guns peeking out from under coats, and he heard hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when he approached. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. The townsfolk were starting to ask questions, to wonder about the man they thought they knew. And Tom knew that it was only a matter of time before their questions turned into suspicion and their suspicion into fear. He knew he had to do something, but he didn't know what. He was trapped. Years ago, Samuel Grady was a young soldier, barely more than a boy, fighting in a war he didn't understand. One day, his unit was ambushed. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Samuel fought bravely, protecting his fellow soldiers, but the battle was a bloodbath. As the fighting raged, Samuel saw a group of enemy soldiers preparing to attack a medic who was tending to a wounded comrade. Without thinking, Samuel charged forward, firing his rifle. He took down the soldiers, saving the medic's life. But in the chaos of the battle, he also shot and killed the enemy commander, a man who was known for his cruelty and brutality. Some people hailed Samuel as a hero for killing the commander, saying he had saved countless lives. But others saw it differently. They said Samuel had crossed a line, that he had become a murderer. After the war, Samuel was branded a war criminal and a bounty was placed on his head. He had no choice but to run, to change his name, and to hide from the world. He became Tom Greeley, a simple store owner in a quiet town, hoping to leave the violence behind him. But the past, it seemed, had a way of catching up. Silas, growing impatient with Tom's continued denial, decided to force the issue. One afternoon, while the store was bustling with customers, Silas strode in, a sneer plastered across his scarred face. He grabbed a bottle of expensive whiskey from the shelf, tucked it under his arm, and started to walk out without paying. Tom, despite his fear, couldn't let him get away with it. "Hey," he shouted, his voice trembling slightly. "You can't just take that." Silas stopped, turned around, and grinned. "Oh, really? And what are you going to do about it, Grady?" He deliberately smashed the bottle on the floor, the sound echoing through the store. The other customers gasped and stepped back, fear etched on their faces. "I said you can't do that," Tom repeated, his voice gaining strength. He stepped out from behind the counter, his eyes fixed on Silas. "Make me Grady," Silas taunted, his hand hovering near the gun on his hip. "Show these good people what you're really made of." He was daring Tom to reveal his true self, to break the facade of Tom Greeley and become Samuel Grady once more. He was betting that Tom would choose violence, proving to the townspeople that he was a dangerous man. And Tom knew that he had to make a choice that would determine not only his fate but the fate of Dry Hollow. Tom took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. He knew that drawing a gun would only prove Silas right, confirming the townspeople's worst fears. But he couldn't just let Silas walk all over him, either. He had to find another way. He remembered a self-defense trick he'd learned during his time in the army, a way to disarm an opponent without using a weapon. It was risky, but it was his only chance. He stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. "I don't want any trouble, Silas," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Just leave." Silas laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can stop me, Grady? You think you can protect these people?" As Silas reached for his gun, Tom moved with lightning speed. He grabbed Silas's wrist, twisting it sharply. Silas cried out in pain, his gun clattering to the floor. Tom then used his other hand to deliver a swift chop to Silas's neck, knocking him off balance. Silas stumbled backward, dazed and disoriented. Tom quickly picked up the gun and pointed it at the ground. "Get out of my store, Silas," he said, his voice cold and hard, "and don't come back." Silas glared at Tom, his eyes filled with hatred. But he knew he was beaten, at least for now. He turned and stormed out of the store, leaving behind a stunned silence. Tom had defended his store, but he knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was yet to come. He had shown skills he shouldn't have had. The town would talk. That night, Tom knew he couldn't wait for Silas to make the next move. He had to protect Dry Hollow, even if it meant revealing more of his past. He decided to confront Silas directly, away from the town and its innocent inhabitants. He waited until the moon was high in the sky, then saddled his old horse and rode out to the deserted crossroads outside of town, a place where the wind howled and shadows danced. He knew Silas would be waiting. As he approached the crossroads, he saw Silas standing in the middle of the road, his figure silhouetted against the moonlight. He was holding a rifle, and his face was grim. "I knew you'd come, Grady," Silas said, his voice echoing in the night. "I knew you couldn't hide forever." "I'm not hiding," Tom replied, dismounting his horse. "I'm here to stop you." "You can't stop me," Silas sneered. "I'm here to collect what's owed." "There's no debt to be paid," Tom said, his voice firm. "The war is over." "Not for me," Silas said, raising his rifle. "Not until you're dead." Tom knew that talking was useless. He had to fight, but he also knew that he couldn't kill Silas, not in cold blood. He had to find a way to stop him without becoming the man he had tried so hard to bury. He would fight to defend himself in the town, but he would not kill. It was the only way to keep his soul intact. Silas fired his rifle, the bullet whizzing past Tom's ear. Tom dove behind his horse, using it as cover. He knew he couldn't stay there for long. He had to get closer to Silas. He peeked out from behind the horse, assessing the situation. Silas was reloading his rifle, his movements quick and practiced. Tom took a deep breath and charged forward, weaving and dodging to avoid the gunfire. Silas fired again, but Tom managed to sidestep the bullet. He closed the distance between them, his heart pounding in his chest. As Silas prepared to fire a third time, Tom tackled him, knocking him to the ground. They wrestled in the dirt, each man fighting for control. Silas was stronger, but Tom was faster. He used his agility to his advantage, twisting and turning to avoid Silas's blows. Finally, Tom managed to get on top of Silas. He pinned him to the ground, his knee pressing into Silas's chest. "It's over, Silas," Tom said, his voice strained. "Just give up." Silas struggled beneath him, his face contorted with rage. "I'll never give up, Grady," he spat. Tom knew that Silas wouldn't stop until he was dead. But Tom couldn't bring himself to kill him. He had to find another way. He looked around, spotting a thick branch lying on the ground. He grabbed it and used it to knock Silas unconscious, careful not to hit him too hard. Silas lay still, defeated. Tom stood up, his body aching, his clothes covered in dirt. He had won, but at what cost? He had revealed his skills, his strength, his past. He knew that Dry Hollow would never look at him the same way again. Tom tied Silas to a tree, making sure he was secure but not injured. He then rode back to Dry Hollow, his heart heavy with dread. As he entered the town, he saw that the streets were deserted. Curtains twitched in the windows, and he knew that everyone was watching him. He rode to the center of town and stopped in front of the general store. He dismounted and stood tall, waiting for someone to come out. After a moment, the door to the saloon creaked open, and Mr. Abernathy stepped out, followed by Mrs. Higgins and several other townsfolk. They kept their distance, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Tom," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice hesitant, What happened out there? Tom took a deep breath. It's true, he said, his voice clear and strong. My name isn't really Tom Greeley, it's Samuel Grady. I was a soldier, and I did things I'm not proud of. He paused, gathering his courage. There was a bounty on my head. That man, Silas, he was a bounty hunter. He looked around at the faces of the townspeople, seeing the shock and disbelief in their eyes. He knew that he had shattered their trust, that he had destroyed the image they had of him. I understand if you can't forgive me, he said, his voice filled with regret. I only wanted to protect you. A long silence followed, broken only by the sound of the wind. Then little Timmy ran forward, breaking free from his mother's grasp. Tom, he cried, throwing his arms around Tom's leg. You're still Tom to me. Mr. Abernathy stepped forward, his face still stern but his eyes filled with a hint of understanding. We've all made mistakes, Tom, he said, using the name Tom deliberately. What matters is what you do now. Mrs. Higgins nodded in agreement. You've been a good man to this town, Tom. We won't forget that. One by one, the other townspeople voiced their support, their fear slowly giving way to forgiveness. They had seen Tom's kindness, his honesty, his willingness to help. They knew that he wasn't a monster, that he was just a man trying to escape his past. But Tom knew that the danger wasn't over. Silas was still out there, and there might be others like him, drawn to Dry Hollow by the scent of the bounty. He had to make a choice, stay and risk bringing more trouble to the town, or leave and protect them from afar. He looked at the faces of the people who had come to accept him, who had given him a second chance. He knew that he couldn't abandon them. He had to stay and face whatever came, even if it meant sacrificing his own peace. I'm not going anywhere, Tom said, his voice filled with determination. This is my home now, and I'm going to protect it. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to fight for the right to keep living his life, for the right to be Tom Greeley, even if he was also Samuel Grady. He would be both. In the days that followed, Dry Hollow changed. The fear didn't disappear entirely, but it was replaced by a quiet resolve. The townspeople started carrying their guns openly, not as a threat, but as a sign of their determination to protect their home and each other. Tom, now openly known as Samuel Grady but still called Tom by most, continued to run the general store, his heart filled with a mix of gratitude and apprehension. He knew that his past might still come back to haunt him, that there might be more bounty hunters, more danger. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. He had the support of the town, the love of his friends, and the unwavering belief of a little boy who saw him simply as Tom. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town, Tom sat on the porch of the general store watching the children play in the street. He saw Timmy running towards him, a bright smile on his face. Tom, can we have licorice tonight? Timmy asked, his eyes shining. Tom smiled and ruffled Timmy's hair. Of course, Timmy, he said. Anything for my best customer. As Timmy skipped happily into the store, Tom looked out at the horizon, a sense of peace settling over him. The future was uncertain, but he knew that he could face whatever came as long as he had Dry Hollow by his side. He was Samuel Grady, and he was Tom Greeley, and he was finally home. The end.